My name is Pussy Galore.
The story of Honor Blackman didn't begin in a spotlight, nor on a studio lot. It began in the narrow, gritty streets of East London, where the soot-stained bricks of Canning Town bore witness to one of the most turbulent periods in British history. Born on August 22, 1925, at 200 Cumberland Road in Plaistow, Honor's world was defined by hardship long before she made headlines. In the aftermath of the First World War, her neighborhood was a pocket of working-class resilience. Cramped tenements spilled over with families trying to make ends meet, while unemployment loomed like a fog over the city. Her father, their home, didn't even have an indoor bathroom until well into the late 1930s. Despite the challenges, the Blackman household was tight-knit, and their community was filled with the small comforts of working-class life: brass bands, church bazaars, and free storytelling at the library. As poetry was read aloud, Honor described the feeling as if someone had handed her a secret key to another universe. That afternoon planted a seed, one that would take root in the shadows of wartime England and eventually bloom on the global stage. When she turned 16 in 1941, the world around her was at war. The skies were darkened, not only by blackout curtains, but by the persistent hum of Luftwaffe bombers flying overhead. London was a city under siege. Her father, recognizing a rare opportunity, presented her with a birthday gift unlike any other: the choice between a brand new bicycle costing 5 guineas or elocution lessons, each session priced at 10 shillings. She had long dreamed of racing through the streets like the neighborhood boys, wind in her hair and pedals underfoot. Yet, something deep inside her nudged her towards the path less taken. She chose the lessons. That single decision redirected the trajectory of her life. The teacher he hired, Mrs. Marion Cody, did more than refine her voice. She introduced Honor to the worlds of Shakespeare, the poetic longing of John Donne, and the sharp realism of Ibsen. Soon, it became clear to Cody that Honor was no ordinary student. She reached out to Frederick Blackman, urging him to enroll his daughter part-time at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, a bold move for a working-class family, especially in a city still reeling from nightly air raids. Yet against all odds, Frederick scraped together the tuition fees. And so, in the autumn of 1941, as bombs fell from the sky, but studying drama by day wasn't enough for the teenage Honor. She was also called to serve. The war wasn't just a backdrop to her youth. It was the very air she breathed. In 1942, at just 16 years old, she volunteered as a motorcycle dispatch rider for the Home Office's Civil Defense, a job almost exclusively held by men. She passed every grueling test required: mechanics, the Ministry of Aircraft Production, and frontline hospitals. On one occasion, during an air raid over Victoria Station, she refused to abandon her mission, hand-delivering microfilm containing decrypted Enigma intelligence that would later be credited as crucial to operational success. Her only protection was a leather coat, which she once joked served just as well as padding against shrapnel. For decades, these daring missions remained a secret, unspoken even in interviews, until 2005, when she finally revealed the full extent of her wartime service in her memoir. When the war ended, it didn't mean rest for Honor. By 1946, commuting long distances through bomb-scarred streets, often studying scripts and rehearsing lines in the darkness of a train compartment, she fainted more than once from exhaustion. But she never stopped pushing, and when her moment finally came, it did so in dramatic fashion. In March 1946, while serving as an understudy in the West End play The Guinea Pig, the lead actress fell ill on opening night. Without warning, Honor was thrust into the spotlight. She had never spoken a line on stage before a paying audience. Yet she walked onto that stage and delivered a performance so powerful that critics described her as magnetic and astonishingly poised. From that night forward, a star was born. In 1947, just a year after she stunned theatergoers with her impromptu performance in The Guinea Pig, Honor Blackman landed her very first film role in fame is The Spur. She was cast as a maid in a British political drama, a small part, but a crucial beginning. The film was shot at Denham Studios, one of the country's largest and most prestigious at the time. For a young woman who had grown up without an indoor bathroom, simply being on set felt surreal. But her early encounter with the glamour of cinema quickly turned terrifying. While filming a chaotic cavalry scene, Honor's long braided hair was accidentally stepped on by a charging horse. In that split second, her head was pinned violently to the ground. If the horse's hoof had landed just a few inches further forward, it would have crushed her skull. Instead, she was dragged, screaming, before crew members rushed in to free her. Blood poured from her scalp. She was rushed to Charing Cross Hospital, where doctors performed scalp grafts and eyebrow reconstruction. She would carry the scar for the rest of her life. Later, reflecting on that horrifying moment, she remarked that even the most dangerous stunts in her James Bond films never frightened her as much as that horse had. Still, she did not back down. If anything, the incident seemed to fuel her resolve. During this period, Honor was not only acting, but also working night shifts as a clerical assistant in the Home Office, helping process war-related data. From 1940 to 1946, she led a life divided between paperwork, performance, and grueling commutes. It wasn't uncommon for her to collapse in a bed at midnight, only to rise again at dawn for rehearsals. On June 22, 1944, just weeks after the D-Day landings, she processed 245 incoming dispatches in a single shift, all while London was still under threat of bombing raids. She kept pushing forward, even as her body screamed for rest. By July 1946, she graduated from Guildhall, having survived one of the most demanding periods in her life. She was offered a permanent government post, a secure, respectable job, but she turned it down. The stage was calling, and Honor Blackman had no intention of staying behind a desk. Her next leap was onto the West, and once more, this time not as an understudy, but as a credited performer. Over the following years, she took on more substantial roles, developing a reputation for emotional depth and an unusual screen presence. But the industry she was stepping into was not yet ready for her kind of talent. In 1950, she joined the Rank Organization's Company of Youth, a studio program designed to groom young actors for stardom. Colloquially known as the Charm School, it painted dreams of silver screen glory, but the reality was far from glamorous. The pay was meager, just £10 a week, a fraction of what leading men made. Studio executives dictated everything from how she spoke to what she wore. Actors were expected to conform, smile, and remain silent, especially the women. For someone as headstrong as Honor, the restrictions felt like a cage. The pressure began to mount. Every line delivered on camera was scrutinized, every public appearance choreographed. In 1954, after years of pushing herself without pause, she suffered a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized for several weeks. At the time, such struggles were rarely discussed openly, and certainly not by public figures. But even then, Honor refused to be defined by her lowest moment. After recovery, she quietly reassessed her priorities. She began choosing roles that challenged her, even if they didn't guarantee fame. In Quartet, 1948, she played Paula with a vulnerability that critics noticed. In Diamond City, she embodied resilience as Mary Hart, standing firm in a volatile diamond mining town. And in So Long at the Fair, 1950, she delivered a nuanced performance that hinted at the fierce intelligence just beneath her composed exterior. Still, but it was on the small screen that Honor Blackman would create one of the most revolutionary characters in television history, and in doing so, redefine what it meant to be a female action star. Television history tilted on its axis. It was 1961, and the series was in crisis. Its male lead, Ian Hendry, had abruptly departed after 25 episodes, leaving the production team scrambling for a solution. With time running out, producers took a chance on Blackman, casting her in a role that, until that moment, had been written for a man. Rather than rewrite the script to accommodate a female lead, they simply handed her the original material and told her to make it work. And she did brilliantly. From her very first appearance, it was clear that Kathy Gale wasn't just a new character. She was a revelation. She didn't defer to male authority. She didn't swoon, simper, or serve as eye candy. Instead, she fought. She spoke her mind. She led. With her razor-sharp intellect, sardonic wit, and composed strength, Gale became one of television's first truly equal female action heroes. She wasn't the assistant, and some didn't know what to make of it, but the reaction was immediate. Cathy Gale was unlike any woman who had ever graced British television, and Honor Blackman was the reason why. Behind the scenes, she worked tirelessly to give the role its striking physicality. Rather than use stunt doubles, Blackman insisted on performing her own fight scenes. But there was a problem: the costumes. Early rehearsals were plagued with wardrobe malfunctions. Trousers ripped, skirts split, and during one embarrassing rehearsal, she was forced to cover herself with a stage prop after a particularly vigorous judo throw. The solution came from designer Michael Whitaker, who created a sleek, dark green leather jumpsuit durable enough to withstand judo throws on concrete studio floors, yet stylish enough to become a fashion icon. On black and white TV screens, the jumpsuit appeared black, adding to its striking appeal. The look became so recognizable that it inspired a pop culture phenomenon, including the 1964 novelty single Kinky Boots that she recorded with co-star Patrick McNay. To prepare for the physical demands of the role, Honor trained relentlessly at London's Budokwai, the oldest judo club in Europe, under the watchful eye of sensei Majitaro Otani. She practiced 5 days a week, mastering techniques such as osatagari and kosotagake. Within 2 years, she had earned a brown belt, an extraordinary accomplishment for a woman in the early 1960s, which originally featured 12 strikes in a fight sequence, was reduced to just 2. In America, entire episodes were banned for broadcast due to what networks deemed provocative content. Yet, the irony was glaring. While some viewers were distracted by the tight-fitting leather and physical dominance, others, especially women, saw something far deeper. They saw power. Often with overstepped boundaries that required intervention from the studio, there was a significant and moving wave of letters from women. Many wrote to say that Cathy Gale gave them hope, that it was possible to be strong, intelligent, elegant, and unapologetically independent. For some, Gale was the first character who made them feel seen. By the time the Avengers began preparing for its transition to color television, with a larger budget and international distribution deals in the works, Cathy Gale had become more than just a character. She had become a symbol, and Honor Blackman was at the height of her influence, which is why her next move shocked the world. After 43 episodes, just as the Avengers was poised for global superstardom, Honor Blackman announced that she was leaving the series. Many assumed it was to pursue her now legendary role in Goldfinger, but the truth was more personal. She had simply had enough. She believed in departing while at her creative peak, rather than staying for fame or financial gain. It was a decision few actors would have made, and it spoke volumes about her integrity. She didn't want to be typecast. She didn't want to be trapped in one version of herself. She wanted to grow. And so, as the camera faded on Cathy Gale, Honor Blackman stepped once more into the unknown. When Honor Blackman was cast as Pussy Galore in the 1964 James Bond blockbuster Goldfinger, the headlines nearly wrote themselves. In a system obsessed with youth, especially for women, this was almost unheard of. Yet, Broccoli believed, and rightly so, that her commanding presence, martial arts training, and intellectual charisma would not only complement Connery's Bond, but elevate him. And he was right. Blackman didn't just match Bond, she challenged him. Their scenes crackled with tension, not because of flirtation, but because of mutual strength. Her character, a licensed pilot and leader of an all-female flying team, wasn't there to be rescued. She had agency, skill, and a mission of her own. The traditional dynamics of Bond dominating the woman were flipped. For the first time in the series, the Bond woman was truly Bond's equal, and in some ways, his superior. But even before the film hit theaters, her role was causing waves. The name Pussy Galore was so controversial that American censors refused to allow it in many trailers and advertisements. Some newspapers only refer to her as Miss Galore or vaguely as Goldfinger's pilot. The producers briefly considered altering the name altogether, but Blackman leaned into the controversy, often saying the name aloud on live television just to see American interviewers squirm. She had a knack for knowing exactly how far to push the envelope, and she used that instinct brilliantly throughout her career. What made her performance in Goldfinger so unforgettable wasn't just her dialogue or commanding gaze, it was the physicality. She threw Sean Connery to the ground using real judo techniques, no stunt doubles involved. The move was so clean and effective that the script was rewritten to showcase more of her combat skills. The result? A Bond woman who didn't just stand beside the hero, she stood toe-to-toe with him. Blackman herself later rejected the label Bond girl, insisting that her character had substance. Galore wasn't there to pose in a bikini or be decorative. She was a woman with experience, with authority, and with a backstory. Her portrayal challenged the long-standing stereotype of women in espionage films as disposable accessories. Galore was memorable not for what she wore, but for how she moved, what she said, and how she carried herself. Her influence rippled through the franchise. Future Bond women would now be measured not only by their beauty, but by their ability to hold their own in the room. She handled them with elegance, sometimes with biting wit. On one occasion, when asked whether she found the name offensive, she simply smiled and said, "If you say it without blushing, I'll answer." She had taken ownership of her image, turning what might have been a novelty role into a performance that would shape the franchise's future. And the results were undeniable. Goldfinger became a global sensation, cementing Sean Connery's status as the definitive Bond and launching Honor Blackman into international stardom. The film's success opened new doors for her, but also reinforced her reputation as a woman who would not be easily controlled, on screen or off. Even decades later, when asked to reflect on her role, she didn't focus on the glamour or the stardom. Instead, she spoke about the power of knowing your worth. In a time when most actresses were pressured to fade into supporting roles as they aged, Honor Blackman had redefined what it meant to be powerful, sensual, and unapologetically mature. And she did it not by conforming, but by confronting expectations head-on. Her portrayal of Galore wasn't just a career high. It was a statement, a bold, leather-clad reminder that real strength doesn't ask for permission. Following the global success of Goldfinger, showcasing another side of her talent, just as the world was discovering her. In the film, known for Ray Harryhausen's groundbreaking stop-motion effects, Blackman held her own not against other actors, but against monsters that didn't yet exist. Bronze giants, skeletal warriors, and towering beasts added later through painstaking animation. It made headlines thanks to its cast and its behind-the-scenes drama. Blackman later admitted that working with Bardot was a challenge. The French icon was going through a fragile period emotionally, having recently survived a personal crisis. Blackman, ever the professional, soldiered on. Blackman's rich, smoky voice stunned critics and audiences alike. She brought elegance and maturity to the roles, proving once again that talent isn't limited by age or background. In fact, her run in The Sound of Music broke box office records, including the largest advance ticket sale in British theater history at that time. It was a stunning achievement for someone many had once tried to box into one type of role. Her stage work continued with Noel Coward's Mr. and Mrs. in 1968, where she delivered a tour-de-force performance by playing two wildly different women in the same evening. One a nagging wife, the other a tragic romantic figure. The contrast revealed her astounding range, not just between characters, but between emotional universes. She wasn't just transitioning from screen to stage, she was owning both realms. And even in her personal life, the lines between performance and reality often blurred. With her second husband, actor Maurice Kaufman, she appeared in the comedy Move Over, Mrs. Markham. Even joy was tinged with sorrow. Though they had two adopted children and shared a life on the road and at home, Their marriage eventually dissolved in 1975. Still, they remained close. And when Kaufman was diagnosed with cancer, it was Blackman who cared for him throughout his long and painful battle until his death in 1997. Despite all these personal and professional challenges, Blackman never slowed down. She continued to reinvent herself, always seeking out roles that pushed boundaries or shattered expectations. Because for Honor Blackman, the performance never ended, it simply evolved. As the curtain fell in the 1980s, most of Honor Blackman's contemporaries had either retired or been relegated to supporting roles defined more by nostalgia than relevance. But Honor was never one to quietly fade away. Instead, she staged yet another reinvention, one that would surprise even her most loyal fans. In 1990, she stepped into the role of Laura West in the ITV sitcom The Upper Hand. The series was an adaptation of the American hit Who's the Boss? But in the British version, Blackman's portrayal of the glamorous, flirtatious, and confidently outrageous Laura brought a sophisticated sparkle rarely seen in sitcom matriarchs. Far from being a background figure or moral compass, Laura was sharp, flirtatious, and delightfully mischievous. She made being over 60 look not just graceful, but desirable, fun, and even dangerous in the most charming way. Her comic timing was impeccable. With a total of 94 episodes. For 6 years, British households tuned in weekly not just to laugh, but to watch a woman in her 60s command attention with more charisma than actors half her age. While many celebrities prefer to stay politically neutral, Honor wasn't afraid to take a stand, even if it meant controversy. In 2002, she made headlines by turning down the honor of becoming a Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE. For many, this title was the ultimate recognition of service and contribution. But for Blackman, accepting it would have been a betrayal of her beliefs. A staunch Republican, she believed in the abolition of the monarchy and couldn't in good conscience accept a title from the very institution she philosophically opposed. Her decision sparked debate. She once again stirred national conversation, this time by publicly criticizing Sean Connery, her former Goldfinger co-star. She admitted that she had once found him very attractive, but her respect had waned. Her reason? Connery had accepted a knighthood while living abroad, specifically in the Bahamas, to avoid paying British taxes. To her, this wasn't just hypocrisy, it was a betrayal of the working-class roots they had both come from. Her words were direct, pointed, and unapologetic. She didn't speak in platitudes or diplomatic phrases. She spoke plainly and, as always, with conviction. That same boldness appeared again in 2013 after the death of Margaret Thatcher. While much of the nation was offering reverent tributes, Blackman broke the silence of conformity. She voiced her disappointment, stating clearly that Thatcher had done little to empower women, often surrounding herself with male allies and ignoring female political talent. She criticized Thatcher's handling of the Falklands War, even going so far as to say the islands rightfully belonged more to Argentina than to Britain. These comments drew heavy backlash, but Honor didn't flinch. She had survived war zones, rejection, and a male-dominated industry. Public outrage wasn't going to rattle her. Despite the controversies, or perhaps because of them, she remained in demand as an actress well into her 70s and 80s. In 2001, she took a supporting role in the wildly successful romantic comedy Bridget Jones's Diary, playing the aristocratic and uptight Penny Husbands Bosworth. The film introduced her to a whole new generation of viewers who had no idea they were watching a pioneer of British television history. And it launched a full decade of continued work. She appeared in films like Color Me Kubrick, 2005, Reuniting the Rubens, 2010, and I, Anna, 2012, as well as television series including Coronation Street, Casualty, and The Royal. Every performance, whether a major role or a brief cameo. Honor Blackman also launched a one-woman stage show titled Word of Honor, also known as We Ward Women, in which she told stories and sang songs about history's boldest, most groundbreaking women. Touring with nothing but her voice and presence, She filled theaters well into her 90s, commanding every stage she walked on, just as she had done for over 70 years. This was a woman who had refused to be silenced, refused to be boxed in by age, and refused to allow fame to define her. Even when the spotlight dimmed for others, she shone brighter. Her later years were filled not just with roles, but with meaning, a testament to the kind of career that could only have been built by someone who had mastered the art of becoming more powerful, more interesting, and more influential with time. She didn't just age, she ascended. Though Honor Blackman portrayed bold and self-assured women on screen, her personal life was not without vulnerability, heartbreak, and deeply human challenges. The woman who threw villains across studio floors and matched wits with James Bond had, in her real life, endured moments of profound emotional pain, moments that ultimately forged the quiet steel within her. Her first marriage was to Bill Sankey, a businessman 12 years her senior. They married in 1946, a time when Honor's career was just beginning to blossom. On the surface, the union seemed like a stable start to a promising future. But soon, cracks appeared, cracks that widened into deep fissures. Sankey, once supportive, revealed himself to be possessive and emotionally suffocating. He demanded to know her whereabouts constantly, scrutinized her professional decisions, and grew increasingly uncomfortable with her ambitions in acting. He didn't want to star, he wanted control. And then came the final blow. Honor discovered that her husband had been secretly draining her bank accounts, misusing her earnings through what would later be described as fraudulent business practices. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. For 8 long years, she endured this toxic relationship, trying to hold herself together while her spirit eroded. By the time she walked away in 1954, the emotional toll was severe. She suffered a nervous breakdown, one that required hospitalization and years of recovery. Mental health, especially in the conservative post-war Britain of the 1950s, was rarely discussed. Admitting to emotional distress was taboo, and women in the public eye were expected to appear composed at all times. But Honor didn't hide. She quietly committed herself to years of therapy, confronting the pain, slowly rebuilding her sense of self, and learning to recognize the signs of manipulation she had once missed. The experience left deep scars, but it also gave her something invaluable: clarity. These hard-won lessons would later influence how she shaped her characters, especially the resilient, no-nonsense Kathy Gale, whose strength often mirrored the boundaries and courage Blackman had discovered in herself. By the time she entered her second marriage, to actor Maurice Kaufman in 1961, professionally and personally. But life, as always, had other plans. They longed for children. But after countless doctor visits and heartbreaking news, they learned they could not conceive, and always seeking to do better than the generation before. But as her career soared, with the Avengers and Goldfinger propelling her to international fame, Morris's slowed. And quietly, resentment crept in. He had once been the more prominent actor in their union. Now he was known as Mr. Honor Blackman. The reversal of traditional roles created strain, and though they tried to keep the marriage afloat, the balance had shifted. In 1975, after 14 years together, they divorced. Still, unlike many celebrity separations, their bond didn't dissolve into bitterness. Honor and Maurice remained close friends. When he was diagnosed with cancer years later, she stepped in, not just with support, but as his caregiver. For 13 grueling years, she stood by him, helping him face the slow march of illness until his passing in 1997. After that, she made a decision that stunned many. She chose not to marry again. Not once. Not ever. In interviews, when asked why, her answer was simple and profound. "I'm a very shy person, and I prefer my own company." It was a sentiment that defied public perception. After all, hadn't she played some of the most confident, seductive women in film and television? But this quiet revelation spoke volumes. She had learned, through loss, betrayal, and self-reclamation, that peace was more precious than partnership, and solitude was better than the wrong companion. And she found great joy in that peace. She remained devoted to her 2 children, and later to her 4 grandchildren, Daisy, Oscar, Olive, and Toby. She spent her final decades between her beloved home in Lewes, Sussex, and her summer house in Islesborough, Maine, a serene coastal town where she could walk in silence, garden, and read without interruption. She surrounded herself not with fanfare, but with causes she believed in: fair trade, human rights, arts education, and political reform. She didn't seek applause. She sought meaning. To the public, she may have been the dazzling Galore or the unstoppable Kathy Gale. But to those closest to her, she was something far more enduring, a woman who had fought to live life on her own terms, no matter the cost. Even as she entered her late 70s and early 80s, Honor Blackman refused to retreat into retirement. She had never followed the script written for women in her industry, and she wasn't about to start now. If anything, she made a triumphant return to cinema with a small but memorable role in Bridget Jones's Diary, playing the dignified and disapproving Penny Husbands Bosworth. For younger audiences, she was a discovery, elegant, biting, effortlessly memorable. But for those who knew her legacy, her presence in the film felt like a royal visitation. And the best part? She was just getting started again. What followed was a second renaissance in her career. She acted in a range of films including Color Me Kubrick, 2005, Reuniting the Rubens, 2010, and I, Anna, 2012, each showcasing her versatility, from comedic timing to emotional nuance. On television, she made appearances in beloved British programs like Coronation Street, Casualty, and The Royal. It was clear Honor Blackman wasn't a relic. She was still an artist, still working, and still pushing herself. But perhaps her most intimate and powerful work came on stage in her one-woman show, Word of Honor, a production in which she combined monologue, song, and storytelling to highlight courageous women from history. Touring the UK and beyond, she told the stories of trailblazers who had faced impossible odds and changed the world, not unlike herself. Standing alone under the lights, well into her 90s, she captivated audiences not with spectacle, but with presence. Her voice remained rich, her gestures precise, and her mind razor-sharp. For younger performers who witnessed her command the stage at an age when most people were long retired, she was more than a veteran. She was an ideal. She often spoke candidly during these shows, mixing humor and reflection. She shared anecdotes from the Bond set, offered wry observations on aging, and dropped unapologetic political opinions with the same sharp timing she once used in repartee with Patrick Macnee. Her performances were part memoir, part celebration, part challenge, an invitation to embrace complexity at any age. And then came the moment the world had to say goodbye. On April 5th, 2020, Honor Blackman passed away peacefully at her home in Lewes, East Sussex. She was 94 years old, surrounded by family, love, and the quiet grace that had always defined her private life. At the time, the world was gripped by the early waves of the COVID-19 pandemic, and her death was briefly, mistakenly, believed to be connected. But her family quickly clarified she had died of natural causes, not illness or crisis. She had lived nearly a century, and she had chosen her exit with the same quiet control that marked so many of her life's most personal decisions. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from around the globe. Actors, fans, journalists, and filmmakers shared their memories. They spoke of her fearlessness, her wit, her elegance, and most of all, her determination to remain entirely herself in an industry that so often demanded conformity. Her children describe her best: a woman of extraordinary beauty, intelligence, and determination, with a unique voice and an unmatched work ethic. But perhaps her greatest legacy wasn't what she said, or even what she performed. It was how she lived. She showed that a woman could be a war hero at 16, become a movie star in her 30s, redefine television at 40, break Hollywood's ageist rules at 39, dominate the stage in her 70s, and still in her 90s, command silence with nothing but a single raised eyebrow. She lived on her terms. She loved deeply, recovered from heartbreak, raised a family, and never, not once, apologized for being bold. Honor Blackman was many things: actress, mother, pioneer, fighter, icon. But above all, she was an example, a roadmap for those who refuse to be told what they can or cannot be at any age. In any industry, under any spotlight, she didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for an invitation. She simply stepped forward and owned the room. And in doing so, she left behind a legacy that will echo for generations.